In the heart of New York City, where glass towers reached toward the clouds and people rushed past one another without a glance, a man named Ethan Caldwell ruled an empire. He was the CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, a self-made billionaire whose sharp mind and ruthless business instincts had built a fortune that most could only dream of. The world saw him as a titan, cold, efficient, untouchable. To him, life was numbers, strategy, and control. Emotions were distractions, and people were assets or obstacles. That evening, rain poured down over the city, tapping softly against his penthouse window as he reviewed quarterly reports on his sleek tablet. He had dismissed his staff early, preferring solitude. The skyline glowed outside, a city alive with lights, while inside, everything felt sterile and quiet. He was used to that silence. It was predictable, unlike the chaos of his childhood that he had buried deep. Just as he was about to pour himself another glass of scotch, a faint knock echoed from the hallway outside his door. He frowned. At this hour, no one ever came uninvited. The knock came again, hesitant but desperate. He sighed and rose from his leather chair, annoyance flickering in his eyes. When he opened the door, what he saw froze him where he stood. A little girl stood there, drenched to the bone, her shoes muddy and hair plastered to her forehead. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her big brown eyes looked up at him, wide and trembling. Her small hands clutched the edges of her torn coat, and her lips quivered as she tried to speak. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They heard my mom, she's dying." For a moment, Ethan thought he had misheard her. He blinked, struggling to process the sight in front of him, a child, in his private building, begging for help. "What did you just say?" he asked quietly, his voice softer than he expected. "They heard my mom," she repeated, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She's outside, she's not moving. Please, mister, you have to help her." Ethan's heart jolted. Without thinking, he stepped out into the rain. The girl grabbed his hand and tugged him toward the alley beside the building. He followed her, his expensive shoes splashing in puddles. When they turned the corner, he saw a figure slumped against the wall, half hidden under a flickering streetlight. A woman, barely conscious, her clothes torn and soaked. He knelt beside her. Her breathing was shallow, and bruises covered her arms. Her face was pale, but there was something familiar about her, something that made his stomach twist. He brushed the wet hair from her face, and recognition slammed into him like lightning. "Lena," he breathed. The woman stirred weakly at the sound of her name. "Ethan," she whispered, her eyes fluttering open for a second. It had been nearly 10 years since he had last seen her, the one woman who had believed there was good in him when no one else did. They had met before he became a billionaire, when he was still just another struggling businessman trying to survive. She had loved him when he had nothing, but he had left her behind when his company rose to power. Success had demanded sacrifice, and she had been one of them. Now she was lying in a cold alley, broken and bruised, and beside her stood a little girl, their daughter. The realization hit him like a blow. He could see it now, in the girl's eyes, the same soft brown as Lena's, but with a spark he recognized from his own reflection. He stumbled back, speechless, his mind racing. Call an ambulance," he shouted to his security detail that had finally appeared. Within minutes, paramedics were there, lifting Lena onto a stretcher. The girl refused to let go of her mother's hand until they promised she'd be safe. Ethan stood there in the rain, drenched, his world tilting on its axis. At the hospital, sterile lights flickered overhead as doctors rushed Lena into surgery. Ethan paced the hallway, his wet clothes clinging to him, his mind burning with guilt and confusion. The little girl sat on one of the benches, shivering quietly. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, wary but brave. "Sophie," she said. "Sophie," he repeated, the name breaking something inside him. "I'm Ethan." He stopped himself. How could he explain that he was the man who had once loved her mother and then left her to face the world alone? Hours passed. When the doctor finally came out, Ethan braced himself. "She's stable for now," the doctor said, "but she suffered internal injuries. It's a miracle she made it this far. If she hadn't been brought in when she wouldn't have survived." Ethan nodded, relief and shame washing over him. He turned to look at Sophie, who had fallen asleep in the chair, clutching his coat. The child who had saved her mother's life, and unknowingly shattered his perfect, controlled existence. The next morning, when Lena regained consciousness, Ethan was there. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked lost, then startled when she saw him. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He leaned forward, his expression unreadable but his eyes soft with something long forgotten. "You're safe now. You're in the hospital. Sophie found me." Her lips trembled. You shouldn't have." "Don't say that," he interrupted gently. "If she hadn't come, you'd be gone. Why didn't you tell me?" Lena turned her face away, tears welling in her eyes. "Because you left, Ethan. You chose your empire. I didn't want her to grow up feeling unwanted." Her words cut deeper than he expected. He had spent years building walls around himself, convincing his heart that emotions were weakness. But now, sitting beside the woman he once loved and the daughter he never knew he had, those walls began to crumble. For the next few days, he stayed by Lena's side. Sophie would color pictures and tell stories, her laughter filling the sterile room like sunlight. Ethan found himself drawn to the warmth he had long forgotten. He bought her toys, food, anything she asked for, but all she really wanted was her mom to smile again. Then one night, as Lena slept, Ethan stood by the window, staring at the city lights. Sophie climbed onto the chair beside him, clutching her teddy bear. "Are you my dad?" she asked suddenly. Ethan froze. The question hung in the air, heavy and fragile. He turned slowly, meeting her wide, innocent eyes. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low. "I'm your dad." She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a small, pure smile that pierced through the darkness inside him. "I knew it," she said softly. "Mom talks about you sometimes. She said you were brave, but sad." He swallowed hard, emotions he didn't recognize tightening his throat. "She's right," he admitted. "I was sad, because I forgot what really mattered." Over the next few weeks, Lena began to recover. Ethan arranged the best care money could buy, moved her into a private suite, and hired protection for them both. But no amount of wealth could erase the past. Lena often stayed quiet, distant, afraid of letting him in again. One evening, he found her sitting by the window, watching the sunset. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, standing behind her. "For everything. I thought success would fix what was broken in me, but it only made me hollow. Seeing you again, seeing Sophie, it reminded me what I lost." Lena didn't turn immediately. "You can't buy back time, Ethan," she murmured. "But you can. Make what's left count." Those words stayed with him. From that day on, he began to change. He reduced his work hours, visited hospitals anonymously to fund children's care, and started a foundation for victims of abuse, in Lena's name. He stopped hiding behind boardrooms and numbers. Months later, Lena was strong enough to walk again. One bright morning, Ethan drove them both to a quiet park, the same one where he and Lena had shared their first date years ago. Sophie ran ahead, laughing as she chased pigeons. Lena sat on the bench, smiling faintly. "She's happy," Ethan said, sitting beside her. "She deserves to be," Lena replied. "So do you." He turned to her, his gaze earnest. "Lena, I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to be here, for you, for her." "Let me try." She looked at him for a long moment. "People don't change easily," she said softly. "I know," he answered. "But I have." Something in his tone, the humility, the truth, made her believe him. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Years passed, and the world saw Ethan Caldwell differently. The ruthless CEO was now a philanthropist, known for his compassion and humanity. But behind every headline, behind every donation, was a story that few knew, of a little girl who knocked on a stranger's door one stormy night and changed his heart forever. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Ethan would still look out at the city lights from his penthouse window, but now, laughter filled the room. Sophie would draw on his tablet while Lena read beside him, the warmth of their presence chasing away the cold emptiness that had once ruled his life. The man who once believed love was a weakness had learned that it was, in fact, his greatest strength. And it all began with a knock on the door and a trembling voice saying, "They heard my mom, she's dying," words that shattered his world, only to rebuild it stronger than before.